Hey, this is Russ from GFN Gaming, and we're just going to do a little rundown of all the weekly news we've had. So a little weekly roundup of all the Kill Team news from all the Warhammer community articles. And so we had a few, obviously, this week, so I'm just going to have a look at them. So the first article was in regards to the terrain. Terrain didn't have a massive, well, I don't feel like it had a massive impact in how games of current Kill Team played. So reading through the articles, they seem to be putting a lot of focus on terrain. And thinking of current Kill Team, there wasn't a lot in terms of terrain. You could just forget the terrain rules. I think there was you generally measure the distance when traveling, traversing stuff. You could jump from the ground from terrain. It's similar to dangerous kind of terrain, and there was some kind of like the scouting phase also set up bombs in terrain, which would effectively make them dangerous terrain. So the roll of a 1, you suffer more wound, that kind of stuff. But you could basically play terrain as just terrain. There was no additional rules that you really needed to be like, you need to remember these rules because it's going to be a big impact to the game. I think if you got shot next to the edge, you could fall down on a 1, that kind of stuff. But again, they could largely be forgotten and you could still play the game, whereas it looks like they're doing a lot more to terrain, to make terrain a lot more important in the new Kill Team. So looking at the rules they've given us so far for terrain, and we have traversable and light, vantage point and heavy. So there's nothing to indicate light means anything. We do have traversable and light, whether they are two separate things. However, we do have traverse as a rule, presumably for traversable terrain. And it just means instead of having to measure the actual distance up and down as if you were climbing or falling, I guess you wouldn't do down, just up, it just costs 1 white circle. Which is nice and simple. I think this is an improvement. You don't have to measure the actual amount. You can just be like, I know I'm taking 1 white circle away, and then I'm past the terrain. Only other thing to note here is that it says traverse is not a climb movement, or not a climb, indicating that there is a climb, and that is presumably different from the traverse. Next up, looking at the vantage point. In the article, it does sort of imply that there's negatives and benefits from being on a vantage point. Whether or not they're just referring to actual line of sight, you can see better when you're on a vantage point, or if they mean you get a +1 to your ballistic skill, an extra attack die, and then obviously the side effect of that is you get a -1 to your defense die because people can see you and presumably shoot at you more. Interesting to note for the vantage point on the Grot data slate, the Commando Grot, it mentions that it has the conceal order even if it's in a vantage point. So sort of implying that in a vantage point you can't have this conceal order. So there's no real indication of what the orders are. You can obviously speculate, assuming they might come from a leader. So if you kill a leader, you no longer get access to these orders, but it's unknown. We still need to know more on the orders system. Doesn't really mention much for heavy, it just says heavy terrain provides cover and is obscuring. Obviously line of sight, so if you are completely obscured, you cannot be shot at. I assume there might be obviously ways around that, but obviously cover being quite a big thing in current Kill Team, it might mean that you get an addition to your defense dice pool if you are in partial or full cover, depending on how that works out in the new game. They've also got rules for kind of your scatter terrain, so kind of stuff that looks like this. So an operative cannot climb over this part of the terrain feature. Instead, they must scramble over it. To do so, an operative must perform a scramble over or charge over action. So that's the scramble keyword. No idea what the scramble over or charge over actions might mean. I could see a potential that they would reduce your dice pool for defense. If you're scrambling over something, presumably you are not able to defend yourself as well as competently. So getting shot at, you're too busy scrambling over terrain to dodge, so therefore -1. Other things that were mentioned in the articles this week for Kill Team were matched play and narrative play. So let's have a look at what they've said. Select objectives and operatives on the fly to outwit your opponent in Kill Team's new matched play missions. So we'll start looking at the match play options. That was the first article. They talk about it being quite finely tuned, obviously as you'd imagine, trying to be as balanced as possible. They mentioned that the core book has 9 missions. They call it the Critical Operations Mission Pack, which is great. I'm sure there'll be many expansions. Obviously each of them providing their own specific actions and mission objectives. So it sounds like match play, tournament play is going to be pretty full on. You're going to have presumably your unique actions for each character. You're going to have a set of base actions. There's going to be presumably faction actions. That sounds weird. Like the tactics, we don't know really. And there's going to be mission objectives, and when we go a little bit further, secondary objectives. So there's going to be a lot going on in each match play, which is not a bad thing. It's just going to be maybe going to take a little bit longer than your standard current kill team game. So they give you a little example. They've got a mission called Consecrated Ground, and that's got its own specific action and mission objective. So the specific mission action is called Consecrate Ground. For one action point, and an operative can basically perform that within white circle of any non-consecrated objective marker. So whether these are the only actions specific to that mission or not, we don't know. Obviously, there might be a deconsecrate ground if one's already been consecrated. Regardless, though, if you hold that objective, you get a bump to your defense characteristic, attack in melee, and your action point limit, all increased by 1. So that's pretty powerful. And as you might imagine, for the mission objective, you have to control these consecrated objective markers. So you get 1 victory point to a maximum of 4 per player per turning point. So I'm assuming that the turning phase is just the new kill team's equivalent of the battle round. Kind of much like Warcry, you've got everyone going at the same time, so they don't have a shooting phase, a combat phase, it's all just the action phase, or sorry, the combat phase they call it in Warcry. So I imagine it's something similar where you'll have 1 to 3 rounds or phases, where the hero phase or the turning phase, and then you've got in Warcry the reserve phase, so that might still be the case depending on how deployment or missions work. And then you've basically got the combat phase or the action phase where everything else happens, and then it goes back to the hero phase or this turning phase potentially. So once you've picked your mission, you then pick your TAC ops, as they're called now, basically your secondary objectives. So this was introduced, I think, in Arena, and obviously continued in Pariah Nexus, and almost every tournament pack they introduced secondary objectives just to give it a bit more variety. I think if you've ever played a game with the secondary objectives for Kill Team, you'll probably agree that it does make it a lot more fun. It does also mean it takes longer. The movement phase, generally, if you've only got 1 objective, goes a lot quicker because you're moving all of your models to complete that 1 objective. Now with a mission objective and potentially 3 additional secondary objectives. They don't tell us in the new Kill Team how many you get. 3 is a nice number because that's basically what most of the other games had. So let's assume it's 3. We could be wrong, but if we assume it's 3, you've got 4 objectives now instead of the 1. So your movement phase is now, you're basically divided into scoring 4 objectives instead of the 1. So presumably it will take longer, but it's still not a game of full 40k, obviously. So they've given a couple of examples of these kind of tactical ops or TAC ops. So we've got challenge. Reveal this TAC op in the target reveal step of the first turning point. So target reveal step, presumably it's just when you declare a target. It does sort of imply that there are reactions, sort of similar to how you had tactics you could play if you were declared a target, like lightning fast reactions. But it's interesting to note. Anyway, so you select a enemy model and a friendly model, and basically if that enemy model is taken out by the friendly model, you get 1 victory point. And also if you do the first condition whilst within red hex of the friendly operative, you get an additional 1 victory point. You've got Rob and Ransack, another one of these TAC ops where an enemy operative is incapacitated by a friendly within black triangle, so within melee range. And that friendly operative is not within square blue of any other enemies. So basically if you do that, you get a victory point, and if you do that and then the friendly operative doesn't get incapacitated by the end of the game, you get an additional victory point. And the last one, again, interesting that they've given us 3, sort of lends into that you'll get 3 additional, but it's Interloper, and this one comes with its own specific action. I'm not going to read it out, it's here, but basically it'd be interesting if you could combine. I assume you can choose the same operative to do your Rob and Ransack and then be the Interloper. So you go kill a target and then you escape off the side of the board, getting 4 victory points with the 1 operative. That would be interesting. So moving away from match play and tournaments, have a look at the narrative play. So this is something also brought out this week for the new rules, for the new Kill Team. I'm going to confess I never, although I played narrative missions, I never played a campaign using the current kill team rules. It seems like it's looking a lot more like a Mordheim and Necromunda kind of thing, where you've got this base of operations, then you potentially get new items and you have to kit out kill teams, sort of like it's setting up for its own kill team kind of PC game, which would be great. You know, every now and then they make a good one, right? So maybe that would be the good one. I'm not sure it's something I'd dive into. I might give it a go, but I think I preferred match play, or at least narrative missions that weren't based on the narrative system. But then maybe the current Kill Teams version was so uninspired, I didn't want to. Maybe the new version will be so good, I'll look at it. But the article isn't really selling it that much. I've no real interest in base building for Kill Team. But there's not a lot of information about the narrative system in there. They're just sort of teasing it out. So again, I'm going to see what it looks like when it comes out and see if it's worth getting into. It might be a great system. During this week, there were a lot of data slates that were also kind of leaked and then deleted and then brought out officially. So we've got a number, and I thought we'd just go through them and see if there's anything that they bring up that's of interest. So these stats are pretty familiar now. The only thing separating the Rubric Marine is their -1 to the APL, so they've only got 2 instead of a standard Marine that has 3. They've also got All Is Dust, which is sort of a unique ability that they have, obviously the same as current Kill Team. If it's effectively a damage 1 weapon in the new Kill Team system, that's 3 or less, they get a save characteristic of 2+. Sticking with Chaos, and we're looking at his cousin, the Chaos Space Marine. Again, you can see the action point limit, APL, is 3, wounds 12, and pretty much everything else is the same as the Rubric Marine. Getting access to different guns now, we can see the Melter gun's got an interesting kind of critical system. On a critical, it does 3 damage, but it also does 4 mortal wounds, so you no chance to save them, so effectively it's 7 damage, 4 of which is unsavable, so no invuns, nothing. We also see Hot, which I think we've seen before, but anyway, Plasma Gun, I'm assuming it'll do some amount of wounds to the bearer. Here's the Bloodletter. This one's obviously a fighter. Nothing special really here, got a lethal 5, but no new rules to speak of really. Next, looking at the Neophyte Hybrid. Again, like a similar stat line as we've seen before. This time's got a lot of weapon options, nothing we've not really seen before, apart from maybe the Weather, that is doing a lethal 5, but no additional damage on that lethal, but also has a stun on a lethal, which is something that's been mentioned before, but I think this is the first gun that has it. Nothing really special on the Reaver here, no unique abilities or anything. I don't think there's anything new on the Hardened Veteran either. Obviously it's got Hardened by War, which is just your feel no pain, but that was something we already knew. The Harlequin was the most recent release, I believe. Interesting to note that this only has 1 option for pistol, whereas obviously the Harlequins have 3 options, which is the Fusion, the Shuriken, and the Neural Disruptor. It might be that this is because it's a warrior, so it only gets option to the 1, whereas it's got all the melee range, Blade, Caress, Embrace, and Kiss. There might be different specialisms that allow for the Fusion. Again, a couple of keywords thrown in here. Balanced and Brutal. No idea what they are. They will obviously make the difference between the Blade and the Embrace. And then obviously the ability showing it still has your 4-up invuln, and it has the Fly keyword. Only 3 movement for a player, which is interesting to note, them being generally one of the faster, and nothing in its ability saying that it gets to charge more than once, for example. Nothing like that, so it's not as deadly as it was in current Kill Team, so it would seem. And the final data slate is the most telling, I think. I think this gives us most of the insight into the new Kill Team. In the abilities Sneaky Zogger, it mentions for the first time, I believe, the orders. So this operative cannot have an engage order. In addition, this operative is always treated as having a conceal order, regardless of any other rules, e.g. Vantage Point. So this is kind of exciting, because that kind of almost, I mean, your mind races when it says stuff like this. The order section for the Imperial Guard was the most fun, in that you can tailor your tactics as they're happening with these little additional things, these little additional sprinkling of rules in there. So hopefully this is something that's tied in with the leader. I'm a little bit sick of leaders in current Kill Team just being a cheap model that hides away. so you can get an additional CP. I am hoping that they cut the link between CP and a leader. Again, I've not really heard anything about them being linked, so hopefully they're not. But if orders are linked to a leader, there's another reason to keep it alive, but you've also got to keep it, I assume, within hex range to give an order, unless you've got unlimited range and order. But it would be more fun, I believe, more tactically fun to have a range on the orders. But anyway, this is, I think, the most information given out in a data slate, and then it alludes to these kind of orders. Anyway, thanks for joining me at the little weekly roundup for Kill Team, and I'm still excited for the new edition. Hope you are too, and I'll see you in the next video.